What do you do when someone's energy says run, but their words say trust me? How do you name a danger that has no voice, no weapon, no smoke, just presence? A presence that leaves your spirit unsettled long after the room is empty. You felt it, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes, the kind that hovers around the edges of warmth but never enters. A mask shaped like kindness, polished, measured, hollow. At first you convince yourself it's just your imagination. You look around the room and see others laughing. They seem comfortable, they're charmed, so you override the tremble in your gut. You call it overthinking, but deep down something inside you doesn't soften, something sharp stays, and no matter how you explain it away, you know you don't feel safe. Because some forms of deception aren't loud. They don't shout, they smile, they nod, they memorize your language and reflect it back to you like a mirror made of smoke. And that's what makes it so confusing. You hear your own words in their mouth, you see your values echoed in their tone, but the reflection doesn't hold, it doesn't resonate. You speak, and something in them feels like an actor reading your lines. You begin to sense they're not connecting, they're mimicking. They ask questions but never really hear your answers. They compliment you, but it lands with a weight, not a lift. Their presence is polished, but your soul tenses when they enter the room. And over time, that tension becomes chronic. You find yourself preparing before every conversation, rehearsing, censoring, watching. You don't know why, but you always feel like you're being studied, not seen. And when you leave, your body doesn't exhale, it collapses. You replay what you said, what they said. You try to pinpoint what felt off, but there's no clear evidence, just residue, a heaviness, a disconnection from yourself. Because that's the price of energetic dishonesty. It doesn't attack your body. It confuses your soul. It makes you question your intuition. It makes you wonder if the unease is your fault. But here's the truth. Your nervous system noticed what your mind was taught to ignore. It picked up on the inconsistencies, the contradiction between the tone and the temperature, between the word and the wave it rode in on. And the more you try to rationalize it, the more lost you become. Because you're using logic to make sense of spiritual data. The dissonance is the message. The lack of resonance is the answer. When someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes, it's not because they're tired. It's because their presence isn't rooted in truth. You don't need proof to feel what you feel. You don't need a reason to trust your knowing. So now you stop asking if you're crazy. You stop comparing notes with others who haven't felt the undercurrent. You start listening to the quiet voice inside you that's been whispering, "This isn't what it seems." That voice is ancient. That voice is sacred. That voice is yours. You don't need to accuse. You don't need to explain. You only need to choose your peace over their performance. Because if something inside you tightens every time they smile, you're not being paranoid. You're perceiving what they've worked hard to hide. And your job was never to prove it. Your job was only to believe yourself. You stayed because of history, because of the memories, because they knew your favorite songs, your old wounds, your early dreams. You stayed because walking away felt like erasing chapters of your life. Because you didn't want to be the one who gave up. You stayed because you loved them, or at least you loved who they used to be. But at some point, loyalty started to feel like chains. Not a choice, but a sentence. You told yourself, "They were there for me once," and used that as currency to justify your silence now. But what you didn't realize is that real loyalty doesn't demand you abandon yourself. It doesn't ask you to stay small, stay silent, stay stuck. It doesn't gaslight your intuition every time it whispers, "This connection no longer feels like home." You began to feel it first in your joy, how it dimmed around them, how sharing good news started to feel like bragging, how their smile thinned when you spoke about things you were proud of. You felt it in your growth. How their encouragement subtly turned to critique, how they reminded you of who you used to be as if your evolution was inconvenient, as if your progress was an act of betrayal. And then came the guilt, the weight in your chest every time you thought of stepping away. You remembered the laughs, the secrets, the hard nights they walked you through. But guilt is not a good enough reason to stay. You can honor someone's role in your past without allowing them to sabotage your future. You can acknowledge their kindness without tolerating their control. That's the trap, when your heart becomes a hostage to history, when "I owe them" becomes the anthem of your suffering. And all the while they continue to pull your strings, gently, subtly, a sigh when you set a boundary, a pause when you speak your truth, a change of subject when you talk about healing. Their disapproval isn't loud, but it's constant, and your spirit bends to accommodate it. You begin editing yourself around them, hiding your joy, softening your ambition, walking back your growth so you don't outpace their comfort. You tell yourself it's just out of respect. But it's not. It's survival. You are contorting to fit a mold you've outgrown and calling it being a good friend. But being a good friend to them should not require betrayal to yourself. And maybe they don't even know they're doing it. Maybe their intentions aren't cruel, but intention doesn't cancel impact. Your loyalty was supposed to be mutual, but it's turned into a quiet war. And only one of you is bleeding. Only one of you is walking away from conversations questioning your worth. Only one of you is doing all the bending. So now you face a hard truth. Some people love you best when you're broken, when you need them, when your glow isn't too bright, when your voice isn't too loud, and the moment you start healing, growing, becoming more than who you were, they panic. They mask it as concern, but your soul reads it as control. You were never meant to shrink in the name of loyalty. You were never meant to stay loyal to someone who isn't loyal to your becoming. And the moment you start sacrificing your peace for their comfort, it's no longer devotion, it's damage. You're allowed to let go. You're allowed to walk away, not with anger, but with clarity. You don't owe anyone your suffering just because they once offered you comfort. You don't owe them your silence just because they once listened. And you certainly don't owe them your light if they only learned to love you in the dark. Loyalty is beautiful when it's mutual, when it breathes, when it grows. But when it traps you in a version of yourself you've outgrown, it's not loyalty, it's a cage. And your wings weren't built for that. You're not betraying anyone by choosing yourself. You're simply remembering what your soul sounded like before guilt taught it to whisper. They never raised their voice, never threw a cruel word, never insulted you, at least not directly. On the surface, everything looked calm, stable, even kind. But deep down, your spirit kept shrinking, because what they didn't say said everything. Their silence wasn't peace, it was power. And somewhere inside you, a quiet ache started to form. Not from being hurt by what was said, but from being erased by what was never said at all. It began with the way they listened, or rather the way they didn't. You'd share something vulnerable, something sacred, and they'd nod, absently, their eyes glazed, their energy detached. You'd reach for connection and feel yourself grasping at smoke. No depth, no warmth, no echo. They were there but not with you, like a ghost in the room, present in form, absent in essence. And you began to feel alone, even with someone sitting right next to you. You tried to dismiss it. Not everyone knows how to hold space, you said. Maybe they're just quiet. But it wasn't quiet you were feeling. It was withdrawal, emotional withdrawal, spiritual avoidance. It was the emptiness that came after offering your truth and receiving a wall in return. A silence so loaded it vibrated, a void so loud it hurt. And then there were the disappearances, not physical but energetic. They'd be there when you had good news, when you were glowing, when your energy was easy to receive. But the moment you faltered, when you were grieving, uncertain, unraveling, they'd fade. Not with harshness, not with drama, just silence, delayed responses, distractions, shifts in tone, as if your pain was too inconvenient, as if your honesty threatened the image they held of you or themselves. You noticed how they never validated your growth, how they sidestepped the heavy conversations, how they offered vague support instead of real witnessing. You'll get through it, they'd say, but never ask how. Never dig deeper, never stay. And that's the thing about spiritual abandonment. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly starves you until you're numb. You began to pull back, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. You couldn't keep offering your soul to someone who never knew how to receive it. You couldn't keep opening your heart in hopes they'd finally show up with theirs, and yet the guilt lingered because they were never cruel, never mean, just absent, quiet, detached. But neglect wrapped in politeness is still neglect. You craved presence, real presence, the kind that listens with the eyes, the body, the breath, the kind that says, I see you, even in the silence. But theirs was a silence of retreat, of defense, of unavailability dressed as stillness. You started wondering if you were too much, if your feelings were too loud, if your truth was too sharp for their calm. But the truth is, you were never too much. You were just speaking to someone who never learned how to hold anything beyond surface. Someone who wanted access to your light, but not the labor of loving your darkness. Someone who enjoyed your company but feared your complexity. And that's not a friend. That's a spectator, a passerby in sacred territory. You deserve more than someone who goes mute when you bleed. You deserve more than smiles without depth, nods without presence, and connections that vanish when the conversation gets real. Love is not just what someone says, it's what they stay for. And if someone goes silent every time you show your soul, they were never trying to know you. They were trying to manage you. From now on, you no longer decode silence to find meaning. You no longer shrink to make their stillness comfortable. You no longer offer fire to those who won't warm their hands. Your vulnerability is not a test for someone else to pass. It's a gift, and only those who are present enough to hold it get to receive it. So let them be quiet. Let them disappear. Let them withhold. You're done begging for presence from people who only know how to take. You're done mistaking silence for safety, because silence can be soft, but when it comes from fear or control, it's just another way of saying, I won't meet you where you are. And you are done building altars for people who never intended to pray with you. It starts subtle. You begin to feel off around them, but you can't name it. You second-guess your choices. You overthink your words. You look into their eyes and see nothing looking back. Once, you felt mirrored in their presence, understood, maybe even cherished. But now the mirror reflects distortion. You feel smaller, insecure, like your truth only exists if they approve of it. They never say it out loud, but you sense it in the pauses, the tone, the way their approval feels earned instead of offered. Slowly, their perception of you becomes your compass. And that's how you start getting lost. They become the mirror you consult before making a move. You seek their validation like a ritual, hoping this time they'll reflect back something safe. But the mirror has changed. It no longer shows you who you are. It shows you who they need you to be. And it's always a little bit less, a little bit quieter, a little more palatable. They correct your joy. They question your choices. They offer constructive feedback that feels more like demolition. And still, you defend them. They're just being honest, you say, but honesty without love is cruelty in disguise. You adjust yourself, your laughter, your passions, your voice. You scan their reactions like a student begging for a good grade, and every time they disapprove, a part of you withers. You begin to apologize for things that aren't wrong. You begin to fear expressing joy, creativity, even love. Because what if the mirror twists it again? And that's when you realize you're no longer living for your reflection, you're living for their reaction. That's not self-awareness, that's soul distortion. And now the question becomes, how much of you did you abandon just to stay likable in their eyes? How many times did you silence your truth because their discomfort was louder than your pain? It's not your fault. They were just the wrong mirror. But now it's time to reclaim the glass, smash the distortion, stand in front of your own reflection and say, I'm done editing myself for someone who never really saw me. Because a cold mirror was never a mirror, it was a mask. And you are done reflecting someone else's projection. You are ready to return to your own light. It begins with a joke. Harmless, they say. Just teasing, they say. But you feel the cut beneath the laughter. You feel the way their words carry hidden edges, aimed precisely at the parts of you that still ache. You try to laugh along because that's what friends do. But your smile trembles with restraint. Inside, something curls up defensively. You tell yourself not to take it personally, that maybe you're just sensitive. But when jokes consistently hit where it hurts, you're not being sensitive, you're being targeted. And your soul knows the difference. They disguise cruelty as humor. They pick your insecurities like petals, then toss them into the room like confetti. Everyone laughs. You feel naked. They play it off like you're imagining things. You're too serious, they say. Can't you take a joke? But a joke isn't a weapon. A joke doesn't leave you hollow. You start to anticipate their sarcasm, bracing yourself before speaking. You edit your stories before sharing, trying to avoid becoming the punchline. You find yourself minimizing your emotions, fearing they'll twist them into entertainment. Slowly, you stop bringing your full self around them. It becomes a pattern. Every time you shine, they dim it with a laugh. Every time you get vulnerable, they turn it into a line. You begin to expect the sting, and even when they're kind, you're waiting for the turn. That's the worst part. Not the joke itself, but the erosion of trust. You no longer feel safe being seen because what you reveal might become tomorrow's entertainment. That is not friendship. That is emotional strip mining. And here's what no one tells you. Humor without empathy is cruelty in costume. Jokes are only safe when they come from love, not leverage. When someone laughs at your pain, they are telling you what they worship. Power, not presence. And you are not a character in someone else's sitcom. You are a soul, sacred and whole. Let them laugh alone. Reclaim your right to speak without flinching. Your vulnerability is not a script for their amusement. It's the place where God meets you, and anyone who mocks that place does not deserve a seat beside it. There's a kind of praise that doesn't feel nourishing. It feels rehearsed. You hear their compliments, but they land hollow, like the words are right, but the tone betrays something colder. You start to notice the pattern. They only praise you when it benefits them, when it makes them look good, when it's safe. Their compliments feel like currency, not connection. You become hyper-aware of the strings attached, because every "I'm proud of you" seems to carry an unspoken, "but don't get too proud." Every "you're amazing" is followed by a subtle pull back into place. They give you just enough to keep you close, just enough to confuse you. You begin craving their approval the way someone in the desert craves water because they've trained you to starve in between sips. And when they do offer affection, it's with undertones of control. You've come so far, they'll say, but their eyes say, don't forget who knew you before you were anything. You realize their praise isn't about celebrating your growth. It's about anchoring your identity to them. Their kindness has conditions, and the moment you step outside their narrative of you, their tone changes. You notice the shift when you evolve. Suddenly, they're not as engaged. They stop asking questions. They make passive-aggressive comments disguised as jokes. Or worse, they shower you with praise, but it feels off, like they're trying too hard to prove something. You start to doubt your accomplishments, not because they're invalid, but because you can feel the resentment behind the claps. That's the thing about conditional compliments. They don't lift you, they tether you. Real love doesn't compete, real support doesn't shrink you, and real friends don't praise you with one hand while holding your leash with the other. Your light is not a threat, your evolution is not betrayal, and if someone starts clapping only when you perform their version of you, it's not celebration, it's control. Set yourself free. You were not made to be a character in someone else's story. You were made to rise. At first, they clap, they ask questions, they smile when you speak of becoming. You mistake it for support, you mistake their proximity for belief, but slowly you begin to notice. The clapping stops when your dream becomes real, when your ideas begin to materialize, when your language shifts from "maybe one day" to "this is happening." That's when the tension creeps in. Their questions become laced with doubt. Their support turns sterile. They don't attack, but they don't celebrate either. And that ache you feel, that's the sound of silent resistance. Your rise unsettles them. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something different. You dared to believe in more. You stepped outside the boundaries they drew for you. And in doing so, you forced them to look at the cage they live in. And when someone isn't ready for freedom, your wings look like a threat. They loved the version of you that needed them, the one who sought their opinion like oxygen, the one who stayed small enough to never rattle their walls. And now you dream too loudly, now you move too boldly, now you love yourself in ways they've never dared to. So they pull back, not obviously, but consistently. They change the subject when you're excited. They look down when you speak life into your purpose. They laugh at your vision in subtle tones. That's cute, they say. We'll see. And the worst part is, you begin to shrink again. You minimize your language. You soften your glow. You walk back your declarations, all because someone who once clapped for you can no longer clap without flinching. This is what hidden resentment looks like: quiet absence, performative praise, a smile that doesn't meet the miracle, and your soul, being what it is, feels the betrayal before your mind does. You sense the pull, you sense the lack, you sense the jealousy wrapped in jokes, and you try to rationalize it. They're just going through something, you say, but deep down, you know they don't want you to fail. But they're not rooting for you to win either. They want you stuck, safe, familiar, close enough not to challenge their comfort. But you didn't come here to be understood by everyone. You didn't come here to stay palatable to people who fear their own power. You came here to remember your calling. And if your dream disturbs their silence, let it. If your glow disrupts their comfort, let it. The people who are truly for you will never shrink in the presence of your expansion. They will rise with you or cheer as you fly, but they will never stand in the shadows hoping your wings collapse. So don't dim. Don't adjust. Don't second-guess a dream that's older than your fear. Let the distance grow if it must. Let the masks fall. You're not abandoning them. You're just choosing yourself. And that's not betrayal. That's becoming. It's easy to wear a mask when things are easy, when you're thriving, when you're glowing. But the true test of someone's character, watch how they respond when you're bleeding, when you fall into your knees and you don't have a performance to offer, when you're not funny, not strong, not the version of you they've grown comfortable consuming. That's when the veil lifts. That's when truth walks in. They sit quietly, but not out of respect. They offer help, but it feels forced. They say, I'm here for you, but you feel the edge in their presence, the impatience, the judgment, the relief that you're the broken one now. You become the subject of their subtle superiority. They disguise it well, they give advice, they bring up your past wins like reminders, but their eyes tell a different story. You're weaker now, I am safer now, I get to be the strong one this time. You start noticing that your pain doesn't move them, your tears don't soften them. They nod, but their spirit doesn't bend toward you. They become distant, cold, clinical. You begin to feel like a burden just for existing in realness. And soon you stop reaching out, not because you're healed, but because you've realized the person holding space for you is also draining it. And then comes the manipulation. They reference your breakdowns when it's convenient. They say things like, I just worry about you in front of others, casting shadows over your name. They use your weakest moments as evidence of your fragility, but they don't comfort. They catalog. They don't sit in the darkness with you. They study it. They become archivists of your wounds, not witnesses. And the deepest betrayal, they smile in public as if they held you through it all. They wear the costume of the loyal friend while erasing the truth of your loneliness. But your soul remembers. Your nervous system remembers. The silence, the distance, the weaponized care. And you realize a friend who abandons you emotionally while staying physically near is more dangerous than one who walks away. Real love doesn't vanish when you're vulnerable. Real love leans in, sits down, says nothing, but stays. It doesn't need your strength to feel connected. It doesn't need your success to feel aligned. And when someone only knows how to love you when you're polished, that's not love. That's performance dependency. So release them, gently, firmly. You don't need an apology. You need your soul back. You need space where you don't have to armor up just to cry. The people meant for your journey will not flinch at your brokenness. They'll bow to it and hold it with sacred hands. You sat in silence too long, holding hands with doubt, wondering if the tension in your body was just anxiety, if the heaviness in your chest was just overthinking. You tried to be reasonable. You gave the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself you were being dramatic, that maybe, just maybe, you were imagining things. Because how do you explain it? There was no big betrayal, no fight, just moments, patterns, tiny cuts that built into an internal bleed, compliments that landed sharp, smiles that felt hollow, disappearances when you needed them most, praise that came with strings, support that collapsed under weight. You began to question yourself instead. You held their behavior under the lens of compassion, but you never held your own feelings under the lens of truth until now, because now you see it. Every time you walked away feeling smaller, it was real. Every time your energy dropped after speaking to them, it meant something. Every time your intuition buzzed, your nervous system shook, your spirit recoiled, it was trying to tell you, this is not safety, this is not love. You weren't paranoid, you were perceptive, you weren't too much, you were wide awake. And when someone carries dark intentions behind kind words, the soul always notices, even when the mind tries to argue. Now you reclaim that knowing. You hold it in your chest like fire. You remember the dissonance not with guilt, but with clarity. You don't need proof to walk away. You don't need consensus to trust your body. You've spent too long explaining your intuition to people who are never listening. So here's your new truth. If it doesn't feel safe, it's not. If it leaves you tired, it's taking more than it gives. If it confuses more than it clarifies, it's a fog you were never meant to live in. This isn't about bitterness, it's about liberation, the kind that begins when you stop gaslighting yourself in someone else's favor. You walk away now, not because you're angry, but because your peace is no longer negotiable. You walk toward friendships where your nervous system exhales, where your tears are sacred, where your rise is celebrated, where your silence is understood. You were never crazy. You were just surrounded by people too numb to feel the truth you carried. Now you carry it proudly. Now you walk in knowing, and knowing, that's your freedom.